History is usually written by the victors, but the definitive account of the Viking Age, an era defined by relentless conquest and blood, survives only because of the men who lost. The evidence for this sits on fragile, yellowed pages of sheepskin vellum. Nearly every detail we possess of long-necked sea dragons, warrior kings, and the great halls of Valhalla was recorded exclusively in the handwritten ink across these specific pages. You would expect these epic tales to originate in the wealthy, triumphant mead halls of Norway. Instead, they were composed here, in the barren, freezing isolation of Iceland. This raises a strange question. Why were the defining texts of Viking supremacy authored by defeated exiles, huddled in the dark at the absolute edge of the world? To understand how these pages came to exist, we have to look back across the ocean, directly into the path of an ambitious tyrant. In the late 9th century, King Harald Shockhead made a vow. He swore to let his hair grow wild until he conquered and unified all the scattered, independent territories of Norway under his sole command. He achieved this through a relentless campaign. His armies marched through valleys, leaving a trail of burning farms. The independent lords faced an ultimatum: surrender their lands and kneel to this new kingdom, or face death on the battlefield. Unwilling to bow, proud warriors packed their families, weapons, and the soil from under their altars onto ships, abandoning their ancestral fjords forever. Harald secured his crown, but in doing so, he drove a massive wave of displaced, angry fighters out onto the open water, desperately searching for new shores. The outcasts first settled on the rocky, windswept archipelagos north of Scotland, the Orkney and Shetland Islands. From these new harbors, they spent their summers sailing back across the sea, raiding the Norwegian coast, and plundering the wealth of the king who had evicted them. Harald secured his crown, but in doing so, he drove a massive wave of displaced, angry fighters out onto the open water, desperately searching for new shores. The outcasts first settled on the rocky, windswept archipelagos north of Scotland, the Orkney and Shetland Islands. From these new harbors, they spent their summers sailing back across the sea, raiding the Norwegian coast, and plundering the wealth of the king who had evicted them.
Harald responded with overwhelming force. He assembled a massive fleet and sailed his forces directly into these western islands. His men scoured every creek and cave, burning the exiles' newly carved houses and cutting down the resisting lords on their own doorsteps. The survivors had nowhere left to hide. They pushed their dragon ships back into the freezing, violent waters of the North Atlantic, sailing blindly westward until they hit a completely empty landmass. Harald's pursuit had worked. He had driven his greatest rivals thousands of miles from their wealth and their battlefields, trapping them in a desolate, frozen purgatory. The Icelandic winter was brutal. For months, the land was plunged into near-perpetual darkness and a paralyzing cold that made farming or raiding impossible. Men who had spent their lives swinging swords and leading fleets were now confined to single dirt-floor rooms. Entire families sat tightly packed around a sensal hearth, spending their days carding and spinning wool in the flickering shadows. Looking at their children in the dim light, the fathers realized a terrifying truth. Without the physical landscape of Norway, the next generation would completely forget their history, their heroes, and the gods they worshipped. The solution came from the skalds. These traveling bards began reciting the old tales, transforming their memories of the old country into an oral lifeline against the forgetting. During the brief summer gatherings, a single skald would step onto a rocky knoll and strike his harp. Hundreds of displaced warriors would rush to listen, standing for hours as stories of old battles echoed over the empty fields. Stripped of their weapons and trapped in a void, holding on to the memory of who they were became their ultimate act of defiance. Over the years, relying solely on human memory became too great a risk. To ensure the stories survived, Icelandic men began ending their long winters meticulously copying the spoken words down. They preserved their past on heavy sheets of sheepskin vellum, permanently locking their history onto the page so that time itself could not erase it. King Harald won the physical war. He took their lands and forced them to the edge. But in the realm of memory, he lost entirely. Every glorious tale of Norse mythology, every heroic stand, and every detail of the Viking culture we revere today is filtered through the specific,
biased lens of the very men Harold had banished. The great sagas were never a monument to the triumphs of a unified Norway. They are the enduring legacy of an exile.